There's something about the outdoors at night that strips away every comfort we've built around ourselves. The walls, the locks, the light switches, the familiar sounds of a neighborhood settling into sleep. All of it disappears the moment you're lying inside a tent in the middle of nowhere, separated from whatever is out there by nothing more than a thin sheet of nylon. Most people who camp regularly will tell you that the woods at night are loud. Animals move, branches fall. Wind shifts through the trees in ways that don't always sound like wind. You learn to filter it out. You learn to tell yourself that what you heard was nothing. Because usually it is. The problem is, sometimes it isn't. And the worst part isn't the sound itself. The worst part is what happens when the sound stops exactly when it shouldn't. These are accounts from people who've experienced something they still can't fully explain. No one here is looking for attention. Most of them waited years before telling anyone. What they share is simple. Footsteps, circling, patient, and quiet the moment anyone spoke. Settle in, because from here on, the story doesn't need to be seen, only heard. Now, put on your headphones. Before we begin, drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're listening from right now and what time it is where you are. It helps more than you know on a night like this. Story 1. The Ridge Camp. I don't talk about the trip to Shawnee much anymore, not because I don't remember it, but because remembering it has a way of putting me back there in a way I don't enjoy. This was about 6 years ago. I was 28, recently divorced, and my friend Marcus had this idea that what I needed was to get out of my apartment and into the woods for a few days. He wasn't wrong about that. I was sleeping maybe 3 hours a night, eating badly, staring at walls. The idea of packing a bag and heading into southern Illinois felt like exactly the right thing. We drove down on a Thursday afternoon and started hiking in around 3 o'clock. The trail we chose followed a ridgeline for about 4 miles before dropping down into a hollow where Marcus said there was a flat clearing he'd used before. He'd camped in that area half a dozen times over the years. He knew the terrain the way you only know something after spending a lot of quiet time with it. We made camp around 6, while there was still light. 2 separate tents. I'd made clear I didn't want to share, mostly because I knew I'd be restless. We ate, we talked, we had a couple of beers, normal stuff. Marcus turned in around 9:30. I stayed up a while longer watching the fire die down, feeling something close to peace for the first time in months. I got into my tent around 10:30. I lay there in the dark, listening to the hollows settle around me. Crickets somewhere, a light breeze moving through the canopy above. I was more relaxed than I'd been in a long time, and I fell asleep faster than I expected. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. I hadn't brought a watch, and I'd left my phone in my bag without checking it. What I know is that it was fully dark, not even a gray light at the edges of the sky, so it wasn't anywhere close to morning. I lay there for a moment, trying to remember why I'd woken up. Sometimes you surface from sleep for no reason. Your body just does it. Then I heard it. A footstep. Close. Maybe 8, 10 feet from my tent. The sound of dry leaf litter compressing under weight. Slow. Deliberate. I told myself deer. The area was full of them, and deer will walk right through a campsite at night, especially if you've been careful about food storage. I lay still and waited for it to pass. It didn't pass. It moved, slowly, around the perimeter of my tent. Not cutting through, not pausing to graze. Moving in a loose, patient arc around the outside of where I was sleeping. I tracked it with my ears, left side, back, right side. I could hear it the whole time. The soft compression of leaves, the occasional faint crack of a small stick. The pace was even, not hurried, not startled, just steady. It completed what felt like a full circuit and started again. That was when I stopped thinking deer. Deer don't do that. Deer move through. Even bears. If you've had a bear in camp, they're looking for something. Food, a smell they're interested in. They don't orbit a tent like they're keeping track of something inside. I reached for my flashlight slowly. I didn't want to make noise. I don't know why I didn't want to make noise, but it felt instinctively wrong to announce myself. The footsteps completed another circuit, started a third. My heart was up, but I was keeping my breathing as quiet as I could. I kept telling myself there was an explanation. I kept telling myself that whatever was out there was an animal, and that animals don't mean harm the way people mean harm. And then the footsteps stopped. Not slowly, not trailing off as something moved away into the trees. They just stopped. Between one step and the next, there was silence. I waited. 2 minutes. 5. Nothing moved. I unzipped my tent as quietly as I could and swept my flashlight around the perimeter. The beam caught the edges of Marcus's tent, the dead fire, the tree line, the ground around where I'd been lying. Nothing. The leaves were disturbed in a rough ring around my tent. The impressions weren't clear enough to tell me anything definitive. But there was a pattern there, a circular pattern that didn't come from me. I stood there in the cold and dark for a long time. In the morning, I told Marcus what had happened. He listened without saying much. He'd slept through the whole thing, he said. Heard nothing. He looked at the ground around my tent and didn't say what he was thinking. We finished the trip. We hiked out the following afternoon. Marcus never suggested going back to that hollow again, and I never asked him to. I still don't know what was out there. I've considered every explanation. I keep coming back to the same detail that I can't rationalize away. Whatever it was, it stopped the moment I started to move, like it knew. The next story comes from someone who had been camping alone since her early 20s. She'd never had a reason to stop. Until this. Story 2. Alone August. My grandmother used to say that the land remembers things that people forget. I always thought that was just something she said, the way old women in that part of rural Georgia say things that sound meaningful without being specific. I think about it differently now. I take a solo trip every August, have done for about 12 years. It's the one thing I do entirely for myself. No itinerary, no company, no plan beyond a general direction, and enough supplies to stay out for a week. I find a spot that feels right, and I stay until it stops feeling right. Most years I come home rested in a way that nothing else gives me. This particular August, I was up in the mountains of western North Carolina, in a section of national forest I'd visited once before. I found a campsite off a logging road, well away from any marked trail, on a slight rise above a creek. Beautiful spot. The kind of place that feels like it hasn't seen a person in years. The first 2 nights were fine. Better than fine. I slept deeply and woke up feeling good, and the days were full of that particular quiet that you can only get when you're genuinely far from other people. The third night was different. I'd been asleep. Really asleep, the dreamless, heavy kind, when something pulled me up. I didn't hear anything at first. I just had that feeling of being awake when I should still be sleeping, and my body already knew before my mind did that something was wrong. I lay still. I'm experienced enough to know that the worst thing you can do in the dark is react before you understand what you're reacting to. It came from my left side, a footstep, clear and close, maybe 6 feet from the wall of my tent. Then another, slow, measured. The ground around that campsite was carpeted with dry leaves and pine needles. You couldn't move through it quietly if you tried, and whatever was out there wasn't trying. It moved around to the back of my tent, then to the right side, even unhurried movement. The kind of pace you'd use if you weren't going anywhere in particular, if the walking itself were the point. I've been alone in the woods at night enough times to have heard all kinds of things. Black bears, coyotes, once a wild hog that scared me badly before I realized what it was. This didn't sound like any of those things. It was too even, too patient. Here is the part I've never been able to explain. After the second full circuit, I shifted position in my sleeping bag. Just shifted. Not dramatically, just rolling slightly to my right side. A completely involuntary movement, the kind of small adjustment your body makes dozens of times in the night. The footsteps stopped. Not gradually. The moment I moved, there was silence. I froze, lay absolutely still. The silence stretched out for nearly a minute, and then, slowly, the footsteps began again. The same pace, the same circular path. I did it again on purpose. Moved my arm against the side of my sleeping bag, making the smallest sound I could. The footsteps stopped. I lay still. They started again. I stayed awake until the footsteps finally stopped for good, sometime in the early hours of the morning. When I checked outside at first light, there was nothing conclusive. Some disturbance in the leaves that could have been anything. I broke camp that morning and moved to a different site 2 miles away. The remaining nights were quiet. I still take my August trips. I still go alone. But I sleep differently now, lighter. And I'm always aware, in a way I wasn't before, that being alone doesn't necessarily mean nothing else is there. This one came from a man who described himself as someone who doesn't believe in much. He said that's still true, even now. Story 3. The hunting camp. I want to be upfront that I'm a rational person. I believe in cause and effect. I believe in what can be measured and tested. I'm telling you this not to establish credibility, but because it matters. Because the experience I'm about to describe runs directly against the way I've always understood the world to work, and I still can't reconcile it. I was deer hunting in eastern Tennessee. November. I'd been going to the same general area for about 8 years with a group of guys I'd known since college, but that year, 2 of them had family situations, and one had a back injury. And so I ended up going alone. The lease we used had a camp at the center of it. A 2-room structure with a wood stove, but I'd always preferred tenting in the field rather than sleeping in the camp. More honest that way, somehow. I set up about 1.5 miles from the main camp, on the edge of a hardwood flat overlooking a creek bottom. Good location. I'd glassed deer there before dawn the previous 2 seasons. The first 2 days were quiet. Cold but clear. I hunted mornings and evenings, rested and read in the afternoons. No incidents. The third night, somewhere around 2 a.m, I woke up and couldn't tell why. I'd been sleeping in my hunting clothes because it was cold enough that changing felt pointless. I lay there in the dark, listening to the woods. November woods are quieter than summer woods. The insects are gone. Most of the small animal activity dies down. It's a thin, stripped down kind of quiet. And into that quiet came footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. The sound of something large moving through dry leaves. My first thought was that it was a deer, which I immediately discarded. Deer don't move like that, with that kind of rhythmic, flat-footed consistency. My second thought was that it was another hunter, which worried me more than any animal, because no legitimate hunter walks through someone else's camp at 2 a.m. I reached slowly for the lamp beside my sleeping bag. I didn't turn it on. I just held it. The footsteps moved around the left side of my tent. Slow. I could track them by ear. They were making no attempt at quiet, whatever was making them. Full, deliberate steps. Around to the back, then to the right side. A full orbit, then another. By the second circuit, I was sitting up inside my tent, the lamp in one hand and my knife in the other. Not because I thought a knife would help with anything serious, but because having it made me feel less helpless. The footsteps completed the second orbit and started a third. And then, I couldn't help it. I said, "Hey," out loud. Just one word. A reflex. The footsteps stopped. I sat in the silence for a long time. A full minute, maybe longer. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed within earshot. I turned on the lamp and held it up against the tent wall. Looked at shadows. Nothing broke the light. I held the lamp on for about 10 minutes, then turned it off. sat in the dark. The footsteps didn't come back that night. I've thought about this a great deal since then. If it was an animal, why would a single quiet word from inside a tent drive it off completely? Animals don't respond to words as words. A sound, maybe. An unfamiliar noise that startled something. But the response was too immediate, too precise. Not a startle, a halt. I've gone back to that same spot the following 2 seasons. Nothing has happened. But I find that when I'm lying in the tent in the dark and the November woods get very quiet, I don't say anything. I hold very, very still, and I wait for morning. Another experience that still bothers me. This one from a couple who were camping for what was supposed to be a relaxing anniversary weekend. Story 4. Anniversary trip. My wife suggested the trip. She always handles the planning, and I always go along with it because she has better instincts for that kind of thing than I do. A long weekend in the Ozarks. Just the 2 of us. A campsite she'd read about online. Remote enough to feel private. Accessible enough to reach by car. We arrived late on a Friday afternoon and had the campground entirely to ourselves. Not unusual for that time of year, early October. The leaves were turning and the light was beautiful, and we set up our tent in good spirits, cooked a real meal over the fire, and sat up talking for hours the way you only do when you're away from everything that normally demands your attention. We turned in around midnight. Both of us fell asleep quickly. My wife woke me up sometime later. She had her hand on my arm and she was squeezing it. I came up out of sleep immediately. She's not the kind of person who wakes you for nothing. "Something's outside," she said. Her voice was completely flat, controlled. I listened. Footsteps, right outside the tent. The crunch and press of leaves under something's weight. Moving slowly, circling. I put my arm around her, and we lay there together listening. The steps went around the right side, around the back, around the left, even, patient, continuous. "How long has it been going?" I whispered. "I've been listening for a few minutes," she said. "It was going when I woke up." We lay there and tracked it. 1 full orbit. 2. Whatever was out there wasn't investigating the campsite. It wasn't attracted to a smell, at least not in the way an animal looking for food would be. It was moving in a pattern. Then my wife said quietly but clearly, "Hello?" The footsteps stopped. We both felt it. That sudden, total silence. We looked at each other in the dark, and even without seeing her face, I could feel what she was thinking, because I was thinking the same thing. Animals don't respond to hello. We lay there for a long time. I kept waiting for the footsteps to resume, for some second act explanation. Something crashing off through the brush, some delayed rustling that would suggest an animal finally spooked and running. Nothing came. The silence held. In the morning, we looked around the campsite carefully. There was a clear disturbance in the leaves, a rough circle around the tent. The debris scuffed and compressed in a way that was distinct from the general leaf scatter. We took photos. We didn't know what else to do. We didn't leave. We told ourselves we wouldn't let it ruin the trip. But we slept with the lantern on the second night, and we drove home a day earlier than planned. We've talked about it many times since. We've never come to a satisfying explanation. My wife, who is more open to ambiguity than I am, says she stopped needing to explain it. I'm still trying. The next story is from someone younger, 19 at the time. A solo trip that was supposed to be a rite of passage of sorts. Story 5. First solo. I'd been car camping since I was a kid, always with family or friends. The solo trip. Real backcountry, no roads, no cell signal, was something I'd been planning since I was about 15. A way of proving something to myself. I was 19 when I finally did it, the summer after my first year of college. I chose a trail in New Hampshire I'd researched for months. 3 nights, 4 days, a loop that would take me through some of the more isolated terrain in the White Mountains. I trained for it, packed carefully, told my parents exactly where I'd be and when to expect me back. The first 2 nights were everything I'd hoped for. Hard, satisfying days, good sleep, a feeling of capability that I'd been looking for. The third night is the one I'm telling you about. I was camped in a depression between 2 ridges, protected from the wind, good flat ground. I set up around 6, 8, filtered water from a stream nearby, sat and read until I couldn't see anymore, and got into my tent feeling genuinely content. I woke up. I don't know the time, probably somewhere past 2, to a sound I didn't immediately recognize. A soft, rhythmic compression, regular as breathing, close. It took me a few seconds to understand that I was hearing footsteps. I'm 19, I'm alone in the backcountry, I have no cell signal, and something is walking around my tent. I'm not going to pretend I was calm. My heart was going hard, and my hands were shaking when I reached for my headlamp. But I'd thought about what I'd do in scenarios like this. I'd read enough trail accounts to know that panic is the actual danger in remote situations. So I made myself breathe, made myself listen. The footsteps were moving around the left side of my tent. Slow, even, not panicked, not searching, just moving. I tracked them around to the back, to the right. The circle completed. It started again. I had my headlamp in one hand. I had a whistle on a cord around my neck. I'd put it there before sleeping, the way I'd read you should. I had bear spray within reach. And I thought about using all of those things, and something stopped me. I don't know how to explain it, except that using any of them felt like the wrong thing to do, like it would escalate something that was better left undisturbed. So I lay there. I tracked the footsteps. They made. I counted. 9 circuits around my tent before they stopped. 9 circuits, and then nothing. I want to tell you that I eventually fell back asleep. I didn't. I lay there until the sky started going gray, and then I got up and broke camp faster than I ever have. And I hiked out in the dark for the last 2 miles, following my headlamp beam, and I sat in my car in the trailhead parking lot for an hour before I could drive. The thing that I keep turning over, even now, even years later, is the 9 circuits. It's such a specific number. Random movement doesn't have a number. Random animals don't complete 9 identical orbits and then leave. 9 suggests something else. Intent, counting, patience. I've been back to the backcountry many times since. I needed to go back, or the one bad night would have taken something from me permanently, but I've never camped in that specific hollow again. And every time I'm lying in a tent at night, listening to the dark, I count. I count without deciding to. I track circuits. I can't stop. This one happened to a trail maintenance worker, someone who, by the nature of the job, spent a great deal of time alone in remote places. Story 6. Trail crew. I worked for a land conservancy for 3 seasons doing trail maintenance in the Adirondacks. Part of the job involved multi-day stays at remote work sites. You'd pack in your tools and your food and your gear, and you'd be out there for 4 or 5 days at a stretch, working alone or with one other person, camping in whatever flat spot you could find near the section you were maintaining. It's demanding work, physical work, and at the end of a day on trail, you sleep like you're dead. I liked that about the job. I liked having nothing left over at the end of the day. The incident happened during my 2nd season, on a solo stint in the eastern section. My partner that week had a family emergency and had to leave on day 2, and the conservancy asked if I was comfortable finishing the section alone. I was. I'd worked solo before, and I preferred it in some ways. The night it happened was the 3rd night of a 4-day stretch. I was camped in a flat area near a beaver pond, about 6 miles from the nearest road. The work had gone well. I was tired in the good way. I woke up around 3, give or take. Not gradually, I was just suddenly and completely awake, the way you get when something outside of normal parameters has registered. The footsteps were already in progress when I surfaced. They were moving around the right side of my tent, clear and deliberate over the dry ground. Not fast, not slow. The pace of someone taking a walk. I lay still and listened to them complete a full orbit. Then another. Now. I've worked in remote wilderness for years. I've heard animals at night, up close, in ways that most people haven't. I've had bears walk within 20 feet of my tent. I've listened to fishers scream in the dark. I've heard moose moving through wet areas in the pre-dawn hours. I know what animal movement sounds like. There are specific things about the way animals move. Variation in pace, pausing, the irregular cadence of something navigating terrain by instinct. This had none of that. The footsteps were regular, consistent, almost metronomic. After the third orbit, I called out. Not loudly, just in a normal voice. "I hear you. I'm awake." The footsteps stopped. I stayed awake until about 5 and then gave up on sleep and started breaking camp. I finished the trail section that day and hiked out a full day early, something I'd never done before on a work stint. I wrote up the incident the way we're supposed to write up unusual events in the field. My supervisor read it. She didn't say much. Later, she told me that the eastern section had a history of similar reports. Not many, but some. Maintenance workers, hunters, hikers who'd camped in that general area and reported unexplained sounds at night. She said they'd never been able to determine a cause. I went back to that section the following season. The trail needed work, and it was my assignment. I did the job. I camped at a different site each night, staying away from the beaver pond area. Nothing happened. But the whole time I was out there, I felt observed, in a way I couldn't pin down. Not threatened, just watched. The way you feel when you're in a room and you're not entirely sure you're alone. Another experience that still doesn't sit right. This one from a retired school teacher who took up long-distance hiking after her children were grown. Story 7. The Long Trail. I was 53 when I did my first long section hike. I know that sounds late in life for that kind of thing, but I'd been a steady day hiker for years, and the transition felt natural. My youngest had just started college, my husband was supportive, and I'd been talking about doing a significant piece of the Long Trail in Vermont for as long as I could remember. I did 2 weeks that first summer, section hiking southbound, staying at the shelters when they had space and tenting when they didn't, or when I wanted more privacy. I'd done my research, I was prepared, and for the first 9 or 10 days, everything was lovely. Hard and beautiful, and exactly what I'd needed. The night I'm thinking of was near the end of the trip. I was tired in a way that had started to go past physical. That deep depletion that comes from sustained solitude and sustained effort. I'd chosen to tent that night rather than use the shelter. I wanted to be alone with my thoughts. I set up in a designated tenting area about a quarter mile off the main trail. It was a quiet spot, level, sheltered on 3 sides by hemlocks. I made dinner, wrote in my journal for a while, and turned in around 9. I was asleep almost immediately. I woke up just after midnight. I'd checked my watch this time, specifically because I wanted to be able to record the details later. The sound was unmistakable. Footsteps, moving slowly around the outside of my tent. Not close enough to feel threatening, but close enough to hear clearly. The compression of the soft forest floor, the occasional faint crunch where a stick lay under the leaf layer. I sat up and listened. What struck me immediately, and what I noted in my journal the next morning, was the pace. It was deliberate in a way that felt intentional, not the variable rhythm of an animal investigating a smell, not the urgent movement of something passing through, just a slow, steady circuit of my tent. It went around once, around again. I've raised 3 children. I've sat up with sick kids in the middle of the night. I've had a long career managing 30 students in a classroom at once. I don't rattle easily. But there in that hemlock grove at 12:15 in the morning, alone and 6 miles from the nearest road, I will tell you honestly that I was frightened, and in a way that took me by surprise. I picked up my trekking pole. I'd kept it in the tent and held it. The footsteps completed a third circuit and were beginning a fourth when I said, quite clearly, "Please stop." They stopped. I sat there in the silence for a very long time. I want to be honest about the fact that I didn't know whether to be relieved or more frightened, because "please stop" is a human request. You say, "Please stop" when you're asking something that understands language, and I hadn't meant to choose those words. They just came out. I didn't sleep again that night. At first light, I packed up quickly and got back on the trail. I hiked 5 miles before I stopped for breakfast. My hands shook a little while I ate. I finished my section that trip, and I've gone back to the long trail twice since. I've never had another incident like that one. But I notice that I always choose to sleep in the shelters now, even when I'd prefer privacy. And whenever I'm in a shelter and I can hear someone else's quiet breathing nearby, I'm grateful for it in a way I never was before. This one comes from a man who brought his teenage son camping. A trip that was meant to be about time together, about passing something down. Story 8. The Sun. My son had just turned 16. It was August, a couple years ago. He and I had been talking for months about doing a real backcountry trip together. Not car camping, not a developed campground, but actual wilderness. Packs on our backs, sleeping where we made camp. He was at the age where he needed to know he was capable of hard things, and I wanted to be the one to show him. We went into the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. 4 days, 3 nights. The first 2 days were good. Hard hiking in the heat, some good conversations while we walked. The particular kind of ease between a father and son that only comes when you're both tired and outdoors and have nowhere to be. The third night we camped on a ridge overlooking a hollow. It was a beautiful spot. We ate and talked for a long time after dark, and he told me some things about school and his friends that I don't think he would have told me sitting in our kitchen at home. Those conversations are the reason you take the trips. We turned in around 10:30. He was in his tent, me in mine, maybe 15 feet apart. I fell asleep, and then I woke up and didn't know why. I lay there in the dark, oriented myself, remembered where I was. The forest was quiet in the way August forests are quiet. That full, layered silence underneath the insect sounds. And then I heard footsteps. They were on my side of the camp, moving along the right side of my tent. Slow, clear, deliberate. I tracked them around to the back, around to the left. I got up onto my elbows. I was trying to determine the size of whatever was out there from the sound. The steps were heavier than a deer, too rhythmic for a bear. I'm familiar with bear activity, and there was no sniffing, no rooting, no pause and investigate behavior. Just that even, circular walk. The footsteps moved past my tent toward my son's tent, and I felt something I very rarely feel. A pure, cold, protective fear. Not for myself, for him. But the footsteps didn't cross to his tent. They came back around mine, completing another orbit. I was reaching for my flashlight when I heard my son's voice from his tent. "Dad? Dad, is that you walking around?" The footsteps stopped. We were both awake then. I called back to him quietly and told him to stay in his tent and not come out. I grabbed the flashlight and unzipped and swept the perimeter. Nothing. The disturbed leaves in a rough circle around my tent. Trees at the edge of the beam. Nothing else. He was frightened, my son, more than he wanted to show. We sat outside together for about an hour. I built the fire back up, and he told me he'd been hearing the footsteps for a while before he said anything. He'd convinced himself it was me, getting up to walk around the way I sometimes do when I can't sleep. He'd waited a long time before speaking, and the footsteps had stopped the moment he did. I want to be careful about what I tell my son that experience means. He's at an age where the framework he builds around unexplained things will shape how he handles unexplained things for the rest of his life. So, I've told him it was probably an animal, probably something with predictable animal behavior we didn't recognize in the moment. I believe that myself, approximately 60% of the time. The other 40%, I think about the fact that the footsteps stopped the moment a voice emerged from inside the tent, and I don't know what to do with that. The following account is from a woman who had camped alone dozens of times without incident, until she camped near a location she would later learn had an unusual history. Story 9. The history of a place. I do a lot of research before a trip. Trail conditions, water sources, bear activity, weather patterns. I like to go in knowing as much as I can. I am careful and prepared, and I don't take unnecessary risks. What I didn't research before the trip I'm about to describe was the history of the land itself. I was in the Cumberland Plateau region of Tennessee, in a section of state forest that doesn't see heavy use. I'd found the area on a topographic map, a flat bench below a cliff line with seasonal water nearby. Off trail, well away from any marked route, the kind of place you go when you genuinely want to disappear for a while. The first 2 nights were completely ordinary. The bench was exactly what the map suggested. Flat, sheltered, peaceful. I slept well. The days were spent reading and walking short distances and doing the particular nothing that is the whole point of that kind of trip. The third night, I woke up and heard footsteps circling my tent. I know how that sounds. I know that by this point, if you've been listening to these accounts, it sounds like a story mechanism, a way of setting up what follows. I can only tell you that it happened, and that it happened in the way I'm describing, and that I responded the way any experienced solo camper would. I lay still. I listened. I cataloged what I was hearing and tried to match it to what I knew. The steps were measured. They didn't pause or investigate. They moved in a consistent orbit around my tent, close enough that I could hear the brush of something through the knee-high grass on the east side of my camp. 1 circuit, 2, 3. I spoke. I said, "Who's there?" More because I'd run out of convincing animal explanations than because I seriously expected a response. The footsteps stopped. In the morning, I broke camp and hiked out without finishing my planned last day. On the drive home, I did what I should have done before. I looked into the history of that specific section of the plateau. I won't tell you what I found exactly because I don't want to lead you toward a particular interpretation. I'll tell you that the area has a history that includes loss, the specific kind of loss that leaves something behind in a place. The land has been the site of things I won't describe decades ago, before it was forest again. Other people had camped in that general area and noted unusual experiences. Not all of them were willing to elaborate. I'm not a person who believes in haunted ground. I'm not sure I believe in it now, even after this. What I believe is that some places accumulate a quality that we don't have precise language for. Some land holds something the way old wood holds a smell. Not present to everyone, not present all the time, but real enough when you're close to it. I've tried to find a way to explain what I heard that third night that doesn't require me to accept things I'm not prepared to accept. I haven't managed it yet. This last account is from a man who, by the time he sent it, had spent over a decade trying to understand what happened to him during one night in the Pacific Northwest. Story 10. The decade after. There are things you carry with you from an experience that you don't realize you're carrying until you set them down. I've had a hard time setting this one down. It was 11 years ago. I was 25, working a seasonal job in Washington State and camping in the Olympic Peninsula on my days off. I had a spot I'd been using regularly, a flat area near a creek in the temperate rainforest, in a part of the park that wasn't heavily trafficked. I'd slept there 4 or 5 times without incident. It felt like mine, the way a spot feels like yours when you spend enough quiet time in it. The night it happened was in September. The rainforest in September is spectacularly, almost aggressively alive. The air is dense and green. The undergrowth is thick. The moss absorbs sound in a way that makes the whole environment feel padded, muffled, close. It's beautiful in the daytime. At night, it becomes something else. I was asleep, and then I wasn't. The transition was abrupt, the way it is when something breaks through. I lay still in the dark. The darkness in a rainforest on a cloudy night is total. No gradations, no ambient light. And I listened. Footsteps, already in progress, moving around the left side of my tent with a pace that was completely, utterly deliberate. I have thought many times about what word I would use to describe the quality of those footsteps. The word I keep coming back to is purposeful. They had a quality of intention that animal movement rarely carries. There was no hesitation, no variation, no sense of exploration. They were moving around my tent the way you move around something you've already decided to move around. Circuit 1, Circuit 2. The moss and rain-softened ground of that part of the rainforest muffled some of the sound, but I could hear enough. The press of weight against saturated ground, the occasional wet compression of something plant-based. Heavy enough to be something large, regular enough to seem deliberate. I lay there for a long time. I don't know how long. Time becomes strange in total darkness when your heart is loud in your ears. I started to calculate options. I had a knife. I had a headlamp. I had a small air horn I carried as a deterrent for wildlife. I thought about the air horn. I thought about the knife. I thought about staying very, very still. After what I later estimated was 6 or 7 complete circuits, the footsteps stopped. Not gradually, not trailing off. They stopped between one step and the next, as if a switch had been thrown. I hadn't made a sound. I hadn't moved. I hadn't spoken. The footsteps just stopped. And then, this is the part I've never told many people, because I don't know what it means, and I don't want to seem like I'm embellishing. I heard something else. After the footsteps stopped, in the silence that followed, there was a sound that I can only describe as an exhale. Long, slow, close. The sound of something breathing out. Just once, and then nothing. I lay there until the sky outside my tent went from black to dark green to gray. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I barely breathed. When I got out of the tent at dawn, the ground around me told me nothing specific. The moss was compressed in places, but moss compresses easily and recovers slowly, and I couldn't tell what was my footprint and what was something else's. I drove home that day. I called in sick to work for 2 days and sat in my apartment, trying to understand what had happened. I've been camping many times since. I'm not afraid of the woods. I don't believe, in any straightforward sense, in things that can't be explained by physical causes. But every time I'm lying in a tent at night, and the darkness gets complete, and the forest gets quiet, there's a moment, just a moment, where I wait, where I hold my breath and I listen, and I wait to hear whether something out there is beginning to move in a circle. The listening never quite stops. I don't think it ever will. These accounts came from different people in different parts of the country, spanning more than a decade. They were told by a mechanic, a teacher, a conservation worker, a father, a 19-year-old who needed to prove something to himself. None of them know each other. None of them had any reason to share the details they shared. The stopping when a voice emerges, the exact and unhurried patience of the circling, the silence that follows that is somehow more unsettling than the sound itself. There's no tidy conclusion to offer, no explanation that absorbs all the details cleanly and leaves nothing over. What we're left with is a pattern repeated across distance and time, in rainforest and hardwood flat, on ridgelines and river benches, in summer and deep November cold. Something that moves in circles in the dark. Something that listens. Something that seems to understand that you are inside. The most unsettling thing, perhaps, is the quiet, not the footsteps. You can tell yourself an explanation for footsteps. It's the silence that follows the first spoken word, the precise, immediate, knowing silence, as if whatever was outside had been waiting to confirm something, and the moment you spoke, it had its answer. Whatever you make of that, whatever you decide it means about the nature of these woods and these nights and the things that move through, but I hope the morning comes quickly for you tonight. Sleep well, listen carefully, and if you hear something circling, be very thoughtful about whether you want to speak.